Alright, so today we're doing quadratic equations again, and here I have another rainbow example. Now, the reason why it's a quadratic equation is because the highest exponent is 2. Whenever your highest exponent is 2, you're going to have what's called a quadratic equation. And this one specifically is a rainbow example, and that's just because of this leading coefficient right here. This 4 out in front is not a 1, so that tells me I'm probably going to be using the rainbow method to solve this. Now, whenever I do quadratic equations, I want to see if I can factor first, before I do something more complex, like use quadratic formula. But for this one, I just want to see if I can factor first. So here, I have almost everything on the left side, but I have this 3 on the right side. And what I want to do is, I want to get everything on the left side so that the right side is equal to 0. How should I do that? I've got the positive 3 right here, and I want to get it to the left side. So to get rid of positive 3, I have to do the opposite of adding 3. I have to subtract 3 from both sides. So when I subtract 3 from both sides, I have to do it on the right side, and I have to do it on the left side of the equal sign, just to make sure that the two sides are still equal in the end. So now I've got a 4x squared, still got my plus 11x, and then over here I'm going to have a minus 3. On the right side, I have 3 minus 3. Those cancel out to give me 0, right? So now I have a 0 on the right side, and I have everything else on the left side. So now I can take a look at it and see if I can factor it. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I'm going to draw a rainbow from the first number to the last number. Then connect the 4 and the negative 3. Now when I do that, whatever numbers that the rainbow lands on, I have to multiply together. So what's 4 times negative 3? 4 times negative 3, that's going to give me a negative 12. So I'm going to draw my MA chart over here, where the M stands for multiply. So I'm going to be multiplying to a negative 12, because that's my rainbow number. But then, what's my adding number going to be? Well, my adding number is always going to be in the middle, so I'm actually adding up to 11 this time. So what this chart is telling me is that I have to find two numbers that multiply to negative 12, but also add to positive 11. So how can I do that? Well, the numbers have to be pretty far apart, because I've got to multiply to that negative 12, but at the same time add up to 11. So I'm going to experiment with a 12 and a 1. Now, to multiply to a negative 12, one of these numbers has to be negative. And if I'm adding up to a positive number, then that means that the biggest number has to be positive and the smallest number has to be negative. So I'm going to put the negative on the 1. So now my two numbers are 12 and negative 1. So now I can break up my middle term into those two numbers that I found. I'm going to break it up into 12 and negative 1. Okay? Now, if I want to add up to an 11x, I have to put x's at the ends of the numbers. So this is actually going to be a 12x, and this is going to be a negative 1x. That way I can add up to that 11x. Now at this point, I need those two terms at this to come down. So I'm going to bring down this 4x squared. It's going to meet up with the 12x. And I'm going to bring down this negative 3. And it's going to meet up with the negative 1x. So now I have four terms together. And now I need to group them. So I'm going to group the first two terms together like this. And then I'm going to group the last two terms together. So this is going to be my second group, where this is my first group. Okay? So at this point, I look and see what I can take out. I'm trying to take out the greatest common factor, right? I'm trying to take out that greatest common factor that they both have in common. So looking at the first group, what these two terms have in common would be a 4 and an x. So I'm going to take out a 4x. And then what am I left with? Well, I need another x to get back to 4x squared, so I know I'm going to need an x. I bring down my plus sign, and then to multiply from 4 to 12, I need to have a 3. So that way I can have 4x times 3 equals 12x. So that's my first group. I took out a 4x. That's my GCF. But what's my GCF for the second? Well, notice that these two terms don't really have anything in common. They don't have an x in common. They can't be divided by the same number. The only thing that they really have in common is a negative. So I can take out a -1 and see what happens. And it might turn out that this doesn't work, but at least you tried it, right? So I'm going to take out a -1 and see what happens. What I'm left with is an x, and then I have to find a number that multiplies by -1 to get to -3, right? So -1 times what will give me -3? It would have to be a +3. Okay? So now my GCF for this group was -1. What that means is the inside parts are finally going to match up. This x plus 3 right here, that's the same thing as this x plus 3 right here. And they have to match up for this rainbow method to work. If they don't, that means you probably made a mistake up here somewhere. Okay? So now I take the outside parts, these GCFs that I found, and I put them in the parentheses together. So inside parentheses, I'm going to have 4x minus 1. 4x minus 1. And once again, I'm just putting this 4x with this -1. And then what I underlined in red, these two parts that match up on the inside, I'm going to merge those into one copy. I'm only merging them into one copy. Okay? So these are my two factors, 4x minus 1 and x plus 3. So now I'm ready to set both of those equal to 0, and then I can figure out what my two solutions are going to be. Now, if I set both of these equal to 0, I'm going to have two different equations. I'm going to have 4x minus 1 is 0 over here, and then I'm going to have x plus 3 equals 0. X plus 3 equals 0. So now with my two equations, I can solve them both for x. So let me go ahead and get a dividing line over here. Okay. Now for the first one, I've got to get rid of that -1 first. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. When I do that, I get 4x equals 1. And now that I have a 4x, I can divide both sides by 4 to get the x by itself. So that way, I won't have this 4 on this side anymore. It'll turn up on this side. So now the 4's cancel out, the x comes down, and the only thing I have left over here is 1/4. So that's going to be my first solution. And then over here, it's a little bit easier to solve this equation because the only thing I have to do is subtract 3 from both sides. So when I do that, I subtract 3 from both sides, and I get x equals 0 minus 3. We know that's going to be -3. So that's my second solution. So now, once I have both of my solutions, I put them in a solution set. 1/4 and -3. And that's how you solve a quadratic equation. You just have to factor it, see if you can factor it first. If not, you use the quadratic formula. But if you can factor it, you can set those factors equal to 0 at the very end and solve those two equations. So I hope that helps.